Cool. All right, so today we're talking data validation. Can everybody see my screen okay? Awesome. So to start us off, I thought we could have a bigger discussion here as a large group and just start thinking about what comes to mind when we talk about the term validation. My questions for you all, and I'll have you just raise your hands and we can chat about this before we dive into the material. Have you begun validating data in your projects? Why or why not? Anybody want to speak to that? And if you, okay, we got one. Alex?
Yeah, I've begun validating the new stuff that I made. I kind of like looked at what the other stuff that was like pre-filled in, and it made sense to validate things so you wouldn't start getting like, well, this doesn't exist, and so none of your stuff works, like the null values screw everything up.
Gotcha. So basically making sure that you don't get nil or null values saved to your database that could cause bugs down the road, right?
Yep.
Could you talk just a little bit about like how or where you implemented that? Like what part of the project, or yeah, like what type of file were you in?
Yeah, I was in the, oh God, model.
Okay.
Yes, the model. Yeah, making sure that when it was created, that it wasn't allowed essentially to have null values.
Right. Awesome. Okay, thanks. Good example. Has anybody else been validating data in your projects? Or if you haven't, maybe sharing a reason why you haven't prioritized that, which is totally fine. Just curious. Cool. If nobody has anything, okay, we have Molly. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. I guess I on the last project did some like front end validation with like how input worked, mostly just like to make it more user friendly. So I think that was like a really like initial step before I knew how to do the backend stuff.
Gotcha. That's great. So that's sort of the experience where a user would maybe fill out a form, but forget to fill in a field, excuse me. Then they click submit and they get like a little pop-up in the view that would say, hey, this field is required, something along those lines, right?
Yeah, or also like limiting what they can fill in with,
cool,
sort of things. So yeah.
Great. Okay. Yeah, that's a good example of a different type of validation and like a good reason for it. Okay, what kind of, let's move on to the second bullet point here. What kind of real world scenarios can you imagine an app needing to validate? I think the sky's the limit here. So yeah, does anybody have ideas of what the real world application might be? Richard?
I guess this is for like creating a new account. You want to make sure that you input a correct username or email, like an actual email if you're required to enter that. And also having the right kind of password.
Yeah, great example. So we wouldn't want to save a new user's email if it was not a real email address. We might have certain requirements around what kinds of characters should be included in a password. Cool, good examples. Does anything else come to mind? Lawrence?
Sorry, everything went wrong there for a second.
You're good.
Does this help at all with protecting your database?
Yeah, that's a good thing to bring up. How would you imagine? Can you tell me more?
Just in by limiting and cleansing the input so that you can't get either nefarious or bad data that could screw up other parts.
Yeah, great point. You can put in extra protections in case like there's a certain type of input that would run some SQL on your database or something, and other various like types of data that you just wouldn't want to store to your database because it might mess with some logic down the line. Yeah, okay. Cool. Don't think we need to spend a ton of time there. I guess this last question here is, can anybody think of a reason? We heard from Alex and Molly about two different types of validations that they've implemented in their projects. And one of those is where you would just have it in your form. And actually, maybe it's just easier if I make sure I'm sharing my whole screen and I go over here. if we have a validation like this, where we have a field and we have this required true, and the behavior is basically that if somebody doesn't fill that out, we get a nice little pop-up that says, hey, please fill this out. Why would we need to also put validations on the model side of things? Does anybody have an idea or a guess? Zach?
Yeah, because there's multiple ways to, I guess, circumvent the client. Because you don't necessarily always input data through the browser. There's other ways you could do it. And also think of it as like the different levels of validation, like a bank. So you have the bank vault way deep, but you have the front door, which is locked. You have the safe room, which is locked, but also the safe itself has a lock on it too. So it's just a way to make sure no matter where the attack comes in, you have hopefully some way to protect yourself against it.
Awesome. Yep. Very good points. I love that analogy that you provided. I hadn't really ever thought of it that way, but it's true. I think there are certain parts of our applications that are more critical or more sensitive than others. And it's a good idea to have multiple layers of security and multiple layers of validation around that. And to your other point, Zach, here's what would happen if all we had was a front-end validation, or this is one potential reason to have both back-end and front-end validations. Everybody can see when I switch tabs and change, right? Okay, just making sure. So here's an artist form. I can create an artist, right? Like behaves like I would want. I can create a new artist. And if I get to this page and try to click create artist without putting anything in, we get this little JavaScript pop-up that's just kind of built into how the Rails view helpers work, right? So that's neat. But let me go in here and I kind of have an idea of what I'm doing, right? I know my way around the dev tools. So what I could do and what our users could do if they knew this information, they could actually come in here to the HTML and override the behavior that we've put into the view, just totally take out that required option, and they could create a whole new artist with no name, right? So that is a very simple example of the client being overwritten and you know, there are a lot of different ways to make requests. So this is just one example of how the client might not be, you wouldn't want to only validate on the client because it's not the greatest security measure. Alex?
Is that like all those videos of the kids showing their parents how they like cheat on all the tests and like unblur things?
Probably, yeah. I think a lot of websites are probably a little bit more smart about this than others, but you can do a lot by just clicking inspect. And of course, when I refresh, like if I were to go here and I don't know, just take out this whole input, can I do that? Anyway, the changes would leave as soon as you refresh. So you're not actually editing the website or anything, but you can use that to your advantage with things like an HTML restriction on a required field. Yeah, I could see like a lot of possibilities for unblurring solutions and nefarious things of that nature. Richard?
So that means a client could actually inject hidden fields into the form, right?
It's possible, yep. And I think that would be another strong case for backend validations, because and we have things like strong params and Rails, a few different ways to protect against common attacks. And that's one reason why hidden fields are pretty easily manipulatable. Is that a word? I don't know. You can manipulate hidden fields and all kinds of stuff here in the console with your client. So cool.
Cool. It makes sense why you need strong parameters. Like, cool. Awesome.
Any other questions about that example that we just covered before I move on to the next slide? I know I went kind of fast, but I think hopefully I got that point across. All right. In that case, I do have a little piece of the lesson plan that I'd like you all to take a few minutes to read independently on your own before we go on to another slide. So this is linked in the calendar event, the data validation lesson plan. I'd like everybody to take, we'll come back at 1:16, I think, and we're going to read from this 1.1 why use validations, and then stop when you get to consider your artist model. And I will just leave this up here and we'll come back together at 1:16. Okay, let's start coming back together to talk about this part of the lesson plan. If you didn't quite get through it all, definitely would recommend hanging on to this to read on your own time. This is actually straight from the Rails docs. But in the meantime, what questions came up and or did anything stand out to you about that documentation that was maybe new information, either or? Questions or comments? Jameson?
I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on that first point about database constraints, when it says database level validations can safely handle some things such as uniqueness and heavily used tables can be difficult to implement otherwise. What is that? What does that mean?
Yeah, so let me read through that point again on my own just to make sure I'm seeing all the words you're seeing. Yeah, so what comes to mind right off the top of my head when I think about database level validations in a Rails app is when we're writing our migrations to set up the structure of our database, to set up our schema, there are options that we can pass those migrations saying things like default and then give a string field a default string that would just exist for every record that was created without that field. There are similar options that you can pass in your migrations to make something certainly, like absolutely with no doubt unique, similar to how we would write model validations in Rails. I think as they mention here, it's probably most useful for the for a database that might be used by a bunch of different apps, where maybe it's an additional layer of security and validation. Like we were talking about earlier, maybe we have that model level validation, but then the database could be accessed by, I don't know, a Python app for some reason. Well, then having that additional validation of uniqueness or with a default value at the database level would be useful. That being said, they're not always super necessary, and it's extra maintenance to consider for your database. So they are good for certain scenarios, but probably not as common or commonly called for as a model validation. Does that answer some of your question there?
Absolutely, it does.
I'm glad. And if you're interested in that stuff, I think the Postgres docs are probably the place to look, because the syntax and the implementation will be different for different types of apps. Lawrence? And then we'll go to Richard.
The discussion on wanting your controllers to be slim, is there a particular reason for that? Or is that just Ruby, a decision on Ruby's part?
The short answer would be that it is conventional and best practice in Rails to try to keep your controllers as simple as possible, mostly because controllers are a place that a lot of logic can kind of just get dumped. A lot of things are really easy to determine in the controller. For instance, in this case, we're talking about validations. You could have some sort of scenario where you're putting together an object and you can call a built-in method called .valid, and you can check to see, based on some other logic that you've written, or maybe even model validations, you can check to see if this object is valid before you call save. And that would be a controller level validation. The thing is, if you're doing that much controller level validation on everything you're doing in a controller, the chances are the controller is just going to get huge and difficult to comprehend and follow and maintain. So there are situations, again, kind of like with all these types of validations that are mentioned here, there are situations that might call for a controller level validation or like another check to make sure that something is valid before it's saved. But it wouldn't be the default thing that I would recommend anybody reaches for, because controllers do a lot of things. They're like the traffic director basically for incoming HTTP requests. So yeah, does that answer your question? Cool. Richard.
I found it kind of cool reading along with the acceptance helper, and that if you have like an acceptance for terms of service, that the acceptance doesn't need to have anything recorded in the database. And if you don't have a field for it, the helper would create a virtual attribute, which I thought was actually kind of cool.
Yeah, that's a good thing to call out and highlight. That can be super useful. I've been in a couple of different situations where we had to check for people's acceptance of terms and conditions. And it's just a pain to store that somewhere where, especially in the database where it doesn't need to be stored. So that's a cool thing to point out, and cool implementation, different validations we can use. Cool. Anything else anybody wants to share or had questions about with this reading? All right, I'll share my screen again. Everything set up here. Cool. So kind of as a recap, I see your hand up, Jameson. I'll go to your question in just a second. But here, like the high level reasons that we use model level validations. We can do more specific things with a very lightweight syntax. It's easy to read, so we can test for uniqueness of a field. We can make sure that something is only so short or so long. Like I mentioned, these are database agnostic, so these would be done on the Rails app side of things, and we wouldn't need to go maintain a bunch of stuff in the database that's validating every single thing we want to check for. We do use them to control what is saved to the database. So we'll see later that these validations are run whenever a certain method is run for an active record object. So basically, anytime that we're making an adjustment to a record in our database, the validations will run. And by using these, we can have better peace of mind about the data that's being saved to our database. This also helps us keep controllers as simple as possible. We don't have to use complicated conditional logic to see whether or not we should keep a record. The model will take care of that with the model level validations. And then lastly, it ensures specific restraints for data for specific model fields. So kind of tying into these other points, we can be very clear and explicit about what is allowed and what is not allowed in our models. Jameson, you have your hand up.
In that last paragraph, when it is talking about when you're making an active record object, but it hasn't yet been added to the database. And that last sentence about that new record instance method is my understanding of like that's like almost like a validation check of active record to check whether all of the requirements are filled out in that active record object to then add it to the database.
Yes, I think that's all accurate. Let me think about this for a second. I'm also rereading this to make sure I'm on the same page. Right. So this is something that you could experiment with in the console if you put maybe like a binding.pry in a controller where you have a new object created and then later you are saving that object. You'll notice that when you call rubies.new, and you have this object that's taking maybe params or whatever in for the attributes, you could call new record on that object and it would say, true, this is a new record. It has not yet been saved to the database. And then once you call save, if you were to call a new record again, it would say false because now active record has done everything. Basically, the validations have been checked. Everything was okay. It was saved to the database. It is no longer a new record. This is kind of like nice to know information about a check. I don't know if it would be totally correct to call it another type of validation or not, but it is a built-in method that Active Record uses to determine whether or not something is saved to the database already.
Thank you.
And it's kind of fun to play around with and pry if you're curious about how this works. Cool. Noah.
I had a little trouble finding the syntax for multiple validations on one field. Like say you want to validate that the name exists and also is a string. I just wasn't sure what the syntax of chaining two together is like.
Gotcha. That's a good question. I'm hoping that we'll have, we will definitely, I shouldn't say hoping, we will have some time later to practice implementing some validations. And I think that would be a good time to maybe explore the documentation and try out a few different things to see about nailing down the syntax. If that question comes up again, though, during the exercise and the practice time, please remind me so that we can talk about it in more detail. Cool. Let's see, what is our next slide? Okay, I think I'll cover this slide really quickly and then we'll take a POM. So these are really key methods to know of and to just kind of memorize as checkpoints where your validations are going to run. So all of these methods will trigger validations, and the object will only be saved to your database if they're successful. So the validations are something we'll define on the model level, and anytime we would run save, create, or update on an instance of that model, the validations would be run. That's just a very basic introduction to how these work and how we would think about them. Okay, I'll go ahead and pause here so that we can take a palm and come back at 1:31. Hey, everybody, if you're back from a palm and can't have your video on, if I could get a reaction or some ASDF in chat or something to let me know you're here. Cool, thank you. Few people. Awesome. All right, thanks everybody. I think we're ready to jump back in. So before I move on to our first exploration activity that I'd like you all to do, I'll talk a little bit about, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page as far as setup. We are going to be working off of the validations branch of this set list repo, which is not the one from the videos, but the other set list repo. If I remember correctly, you all have used this set list repo in recent classes. Is that right? Do you all have a copy of this one that you've been working on with Brian in class? I see a few head nods. Okay, cool. Essentially, what I would expect if you don't have this on your computer, I would expect you to be able to just clone this down, or if you have it, but you don't have updates, to do a get pull and then check out the validations branch, and you should be good to go without any Ruby versioning issues or anything like that. But before we get into the exploration, I wanted to give people a couple minutes just to make sure that we're all set up for that. Yeah, so let's check back in at 1:35 just to give people a chance to get set up. And if there are any issues, then I'll probably troubleshoot those with you during breakout rooms. But yes, this is what we're going to be doing here in a couple of minutes, barring any environment issues. We'll be opening up a Rails console session, and you can use this on any model, but essentially you're going to be experimenting with the create, update, and save methods, creating a new model, updating it, saving it, doing the same, all three of those things, but adding a bang to the end of that method, and then discussing these questions with your breakout room. What are the return values for each of these methods in either a happy path case where the record is created, updated, or saved, or in a sad path case where a validation fails, maybe because you're trying to create a song without an artist, for example. What do these methods return in a case of a failure? And we're going to have an exercise that we do as a whole group when we get back. We're going to fill out a chart. So just make sure that you're going over these discussion questions with your group. I'll leave this here in case anybody's still looking at it. But were there any questions about checking out the validations branch of the set list repo? Anything I can clear up there, Natia?
The name is Validations.
Yes, that's the name of the branch, just validations, and yep.
So if we get the path does not exist error, what do we do?
You are in the set list repo, right? Not set list tutorials. Mm-hmm. And you did a get pull.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would expect get checkout validations to run just fine. But if it doesn't, hang back when I open up the breakout rooms and we'll troubleshoot it together.
All right.
Any other questions about this activity before I open up those breakout rooms? Okay, we will take 1:35. We'll take about 10 minutes, I think, to explore this, 10 to 15 minutes, and then we'll do a little activity when we get back. If you're having any issues with getting set up, hang back and we can troubleshoot those together. The breakout room's open for y'all. Took a couple tries. Okay, looks like it. All right, let's do a quick round robin of what everybody's running into. Natia, you were saying that it was a path doesn't exist error?
Yep.
Okay. What about UD?
Having problems trying to stash my old local changes so I can move on.
Okay, cool. Alex?
Same as D.
Okay, Joanna? I'm not sure if we have Joanna here with us. Dougie, are you having any particular issue?
My Zoom just shut down.
Oh,
out of
okay.
nowhere, so yeah, just gotta
Gotcha.
get put in the breakout room.
I will send you to a breakout room right now. Let's take a look at, I guess if either Dee or Alex, if either of you want to share, we can look at the stash thing first, since a couple of you are having that issue, and then we'll move on to the no path issue. Okay, can we do a get status? Okay, and then get diff, I suppose. Interesting. Get diff didn't return anything for you, right? I don't know that I've seen this, but what I might almost recommend, what branch are you on right now? Can we do a get branch?
Yeah, I'm on passing
Passing
data.
data, okay. Yeah, I might even, okay, I think so if get stash doesn't work, what I might almost recommend is doing a like a throwaway or a work in progress commit. So you could just do a get add space dot and commit that with some message. You could, like, as long as you don't try to push this up to our repo or anything, there's no issue there, and you can always just wipe away the commit later if you want to. That's probably how I would get around this in a pinch. Okay, and then let's see if you can, you might need to do a, get checkout origin / validations. It'll be like a, I think Jameson put it in chat, origin / validations, no space, and a slash instead of a dash. Depending upon whether you do like a fetch or a pull, sometimes you have to include like the origin flag at the beginning, or the origin path at the beginning. So will this work? Can you get to that branch? You're in a detached head state. Can you do get checkout dash? That'll just switch you back to the other branch you were on, and then get status. Okay, I'm not sure exactly why you got that warning when you checked out the other branch, but I think you're okay to just continue working on it. And then I would recommend switching back to this branch or main whenever we're done with class. Yeah, and if it causes more Git issues, you can send us a DM and we can look into it in more detail, but I mostly just want to get you up and running for the exercise. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Alex, did that, was that a similar issue to yours, or do you want to go ahead and share your screen?
It was similar, but I think I may have, oh yeah, I accidentally created my own branch called validation.
Okay.
In the process of trying to troubleshoot, so.
That's no problem. That extra branch won't hurt anything. Let's do a similar get checkout and then dash to get back to the branch you were on.
Well, yeah, what I did was based on what you said, I just
okay.
Added and said delete me in the git commit line. And
Okay.
then I'll uncommit it later.
Okay. So now if you do like a get checkout origin / validations, does that do anything for you?
Oh, / validations.
Yeah, depending upon whether you've done like a fetch or a pull recently, you might have to include the whole like origin path. So it'll be get checkout origin / validations. Yeah, and you'll want it without the space. Or with a space between checkout and origin, and without a space between the origin and /. Yep.
Without a space here.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, both spaces?
Correct. Yeah, you want to get rid of both of those as if it's all one branch name. And then I think your checkout command needed a space between that and origin. Yeah, that should work. And it's giving us this detached head state. I think that's okay, but I would recommend after class switching back over to the other branch. I'm not entirely sure why we're in this state, but it shouldn't prevent you from working.
Okay, so yeah, so remotes origin validations is fine.
Yep, I believe that's where we want to be.
Cool. Thank you.
No problem. Natia, let's take a look at what you were running into. Okay, can we do a get branch?
Yep.
Okay, how about a get fetch? Okay, now we'll do get branch dash A, and that'll show all the branches, local and remote. Interesting. Okay, so I think you're actually on the setlist tutorial repo and not the setlist repo, because setlist doesn't have the songs index and the, yeah, so I think we want to look for the other. And if you don't have it, I can, yeah, 1 second. Grab that link just in case you need it. Okay, and here it looks like you're going to want to do a get stash. Wait, but oh, okay.
Nope.
Mm,
How do you get out of that?
I'm not sure. It looks like you have all the quotes you need.
Oh, that worked. Okay. Well, it didn't commit my thing.
Okay. So now you're all set.
Sweet. Thanks.
No problem. Didn't do much, but you got it. Cool.
Yeah, that was super helpful. Where do I go? Breakout cell?
Yes.
All right. Thanks.
No problem. Thank you. Joanna, is there anything I can help you with as far as your setup, branches, etc., if you're there?
Hey, Jameson.
What's up, Jameson?
Hi, just peeking in to see about where y'all are at and how much you've or how much more time would be appropriate. How are things going?
Pretty good. We've gone through create and everything, so now we're just doing update and save.
All right.
So not too much longer.
Cool. Well, then I'll see y'all in a bit.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks.
When it wasn't just validating, so now I have some validations in my song model, and I'm going to go through and try again and see if I get a different result.
Welcome back, everybody. Before we move on to the next slide and go into an exercise around what you just tried out in your breakout rooms, what questions came up as you were going through this exercise? Lawrence?
Were any of these supposed to break?
Yeah, I would, yeah, more detail if you have it, would be great.
Oh, I was messing with artists and songs, and I seemed to be able to do everything with them, but I might have just been missing something.
Okay, yeah, so with these instructions, we would be running these methods and some of them would be successful, presumably, and some of them would not be successful. So the idea would be to really understand the return value if a create is successful, and then also understand the return value if a create is not successful. And the same for all of these other methods. So some of them, ideally, you'd be able to experiment with them and test them in both a case that is successful or in a case that breaks, maybe. But yeah, not all of this was supposed to be a successful addition of something to the database. If something else completely unrelated to like a return value from a create or an update or a save, if something totally unrelated broke, that would be concerning, but it's actually really valuable to see some of these fail so that you can examine and understand the return value that you get in the terminal. Was that helpful, Lawrence? Any other questions? Mark?
I was curious, if you do like .new, and it's like, it's not in the database, but you can still kind of pull it before you save it. Is that like saved in like a working memory or something?
Yeah, exactly. So if you think back to the new method, we've been using the new method for a long time, and it actually comes for free with Ruby. And the same way that in mod 1, you would have maybe an instance variable holding onto an object, or just a regular variable, depending upon the scope you're working with, that's just saved in local memory. You could save it to a variable in your Rails C session, and it would just be saved in local memory, but it's not persisted to the database.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. Jameson?
I guess I didn't really pick up on what the bang was doing. We were like looking for different behavior, but you're saying that's like different output, like error output.
Yeah. So your basic takeaway was you didn't notice the difference between like create with a bang and create without a bang. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, cool. Yes, so I think the next exercise will be helpful in demonstrating more of that. Yeah, actually, I'll just segue right into it. So the next thing that I'd like to do is create this graph together. I'll call on a couple of people to I'll ask you, what does this method return in the case of a success? What does it return in the case of no success? And in case there were any groups, or if there just wasn't enough time to explore all these, we'll walk through it in the terminal on my computer as well, and we'll see if your prediction was correct. And you can absolutely feel free to phone a friend if I call on you and you have no idea what it returns. So for this first one, I guess let's just walk through the process together. I won't call on anybody for this one, but think to yourself, based on your exploration in your breakout room, what would you expect a song.create to return in a successful case? And I'm going to go ahead and get that set up in my terminal right now. I'm going to say song. Actually, first I should make sure, because I want this to be successful. So I'll need to give it an artist. And I do have one. Okay, cool. So I can say, I don't think we need a song length or a play count at this point, but I am going to give it an artist ID of 1. And this is the return value. After the hash rocket here, we get a song object. We get an instance of the song class. So I'm going to say created object is the return value. And just to orient ourselves, what do each of these methods return? So now I would ask you all to think to yourself about what you expect to be returned in the case of no success. for making a new song with the create method with no bang. And this gives us a message about a rollback, but it returns to us a song object that was not created. And we have a clue here where we can see that the ID is nil, and that kind of is a giveaway that it wasn't saved to the database. Of course, we also have this output that can help us come to those conclusions, but the return value is an object. It is an instance of the song class, but it's not an object that was saved to the database. Alex.
So if it says rollback, that means it just didn't work.
Correct.
Cool.
I mean, it means it wasn't persisted to the database. Okay, so let's move on to create with a bang. I'm going to call on somebody for this one. You can bump to a friend, or you can take a guess, or you can tell me what you talked about in your group or what you noticed in your group. Dougie, what do you think is going to return for a successful create with a bang?
It's going to create, or it's going to give the same thing back, just with a song ID.
Okay.
And the other information instead of nil, like I gave back the first time.
Cool. Let's test it out. So I'm going to say song create title, and then artist ID of 1.
Got the bang.
Thank you. Okay, so Dougie, your prediction was that it's going to return a created object, right, with an ID and everything?
Yes.
And that's what I see here, exactly. So let's do a version real quick without an artist ID. And what do you expect this to return?
Are you asking me again?
Yeah.
Just nil. It should give you back nil.
No? Okay, let's see. So this with the bang actually raises an exception. So when we ask you all to put a bang in create with your tests, this is part of the reason. This way, if your test fails because your mock data couldn't be created, it gives a more helpful error. It actually raises an exception, which is a type of very specific Rails error, which just means that everything just stops. When an exception is raised, everything just stops unless the exception is handled with code we would have to write ourselves. So that's just a little teeny bit of background information on raising an exception. Joe.
So do the validations we create and us using the bang work together? Like if we have more validations, will it give us what's wrong according to the validations we have put in our models?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So let me think about how I want to demonstrate this. Essentially, what I'll say here is what we're testing here is not any custom validations that we have written for the artist model or the song model, but really the relationships are acting as a type of validation. So what I would focus on with this exercise is understanding what the bang gives us and what messages or what return values are given back to us when we attempt to perform an action and a validation either succeeds or doesn't succeed. The bang, what I'm getting at here is that the bang is going to return something different. So if you want to raise an exception, an example would be in setting up data and tests, then it will just say, hey, hold on, stop, something didn't work, a validation did not pass. Whereas without a bang, it might fail more silently. I'd like to take a volunteer for update, so let me do that. Hava Jahara. Gunnar, would you like to walk through this update with no bang case with me or phone a friend? First question is, what do you expect the successful update to return?
Let me double check through our old code.
Okay. While you're doing that, I'm going to get set up with something in the terminal.
Yeah.
I guess it's another title. Okay, so we're looking at the successful case for an update with no bang first. Gunnar, what do you think this is? What is the return value going to be here?
What I think is going to be like the instance of the song, just with the new updated title, I think.
Yeah, let's try it. And that seems right to me. It actually is returning us, it is returning us this new value that we updated, but instead of sending us back the whole song object, it's just saying true, this worked. Cool. Let me try this again, but now I'm gonna try to update something I can't, like in a way that won't work. So artist ID nil, I think that will break. And what would you expect the return value to be for a non-successful update, Gunnar?
If that's the case, I think it should give back a false then, correct? Like
Let's try it.
It can't do it.
Yeah, let's try it. There you go. Nice skills of deduction there. So with a success, it returned true. With no success, it returned false. Thank you, Gunnar. I'm gonna keep trucking along here so we can take a palm in a second. Let me call on somebody, and this will be the case for an update with a bang. Kevin, what do you think? Let's see, song update, bang, and we'll say the title is now newer song. What do you expect this to return?
I would guess it would return true, like it was without the bang.
Let's try it. Oops, what did I do? Well, now we know what the unsuccessful one was. Validation failed, artist must exist. So with the bang, it raised an exception. Let me try, can I just like add? I don't know. And there you go, true. Okay. Nice work, thanks, Kevin. So true, and sorry for giving you the answer, but this raises an exception. Okay, I'm gonna get it set up one more time with a new, so that we can try out the save method. So I'll say, let me clear this. Song 2 is title rodeo, artist ID 1. So that's the new song. Let me call on somebody for this. Dee, what do we think? What do you think the song 2.save in a successful case would return?
I think it would return true and do like that begin commit.
Okay, let's see. Exactly. So we get kind of similar to how we did with an update. We see all these fields that we inserted, but then the return value that we get is true. Cool. And if you'll sit tight while I work on doing a song 3 so we can look at the unsuccessful song new, and we'll only give it a title. What would you expect this to return, Dee?
The false and rollback.
Yeah, let's try it. Oops, yeah, I have to actually save it. Sorry. But yeah, that's correct. We get our begin, rollback, and a false for the version without the bang. I'll take a volunteer for the last one. Anybody want to be brave and give it a try? We'll have a title, last song, and an artist ID. Molly, what do you think? Not this, but this. What do you think this is going to return?
So I think it should return true if it's successful.
Let's try it. And there you go. We get all of our SQL stuff, and then you get exactly like you predicted, a true message. I'm going to do one more new object. And if I call song 5.save with a bang and we expect this to fail, what do you think the return value will be?
It should raise an exception.
Exactly. So here we get true. Here we get raises an exception. Okay, last question before I break for a palm. Can anybody think of, and I don't really have an answer for this question, it's more food for thought, but I'd like to hear if any of y'all talked about this. why might these different return values be useful? How could, like, why do we care? Any ideas? Zach?
Flow control. So you can see the state of the records you're working with to make a decision on what you need to do next.
Yeah, absolutely. Lawrence, anything to add to that or something different?
No, basically the same thing. It's just easier to troubleshoot with typically with the bangs than it isn't.
Yeah, we see that in our tests for sure. Cool. Noah.
I maybe have found a use case for save without a bang. I used it to kind of operate a conditional to like give you a flash message without crashing the app. But just like if a user tries to input something, you can use that save without a bang to say, hey, you missed this.
Yeah, that's true. So it can, using save without a bang would be, I think, like a specific example of how some of these can work into flow control, where maybe you're maybe you want to have a more flexible way of creating an object. I'm struggling to think of an example off the top of my head that wouldn't like go back to talking about controller level validations, but that's all true, all good points. I would say that that's a good question to keep thinking about as we move through classes this week. Let's take a palm here and come back at 2:13. All right, as we're coming back from that POM, this is basically what we'll spend the rest of our class time on today. So this is an exercise that we're asking you all to do to practice implementing validations. You can do this on the set list validations branch. And part of the challenge that we're posing today is that this is an exploratory exercise. We haven't explicitly covered all the syntax of how to add validations in class, and our goal is to have you all explore the documentation yourself. So I did link this in the slides, but I'll go over it briefly to give you an idea of what I think is useful to spend time on. So there are 2 resources listed here, and actually I think I'll go ahead and drop these in the Zoom chat just in case anybody needs them in that format. One moment. So this will include some validation testing syntax using shoulda matchers. And we are primarily interested in the active model matchers. So you can test that it validates the exclusion of certain things or validates the numericality of a field, etc. So this is where I would mainly focus with that first link that is in the slides and in the chat. So that's for testing. And then there's another link here that goes into the documentation for the actual active record validations. This is the Rails docs that you are likely getting very familiar with. And they will have examples as well as some text about how they work. So there's a lot to explore here. We can find different types of validations, like, sorry for all the scrolling, trying to be efficient here. Uniqueness, stuff like that. I don't want to give away too much. I want you all to have a chance to kind of parse these docs yourself. It's a very important part of the job. But that being said, we will spend about 30 minutes here. Y'all will explore with I'm putting you into slightly smaller breakout rooms. You and your pair will explore this stuff, try to add some validations, get as far as you can in this list. This is all in the slides linked in the calendar, and we'll come back together in about 30 minutes for a POM and also any questions that came up. And then we'll open it back up for another however much time we have left for y'all to keep working on this. Any questions about what I'm asking you to do, Joe?
Are we supposed to be testing that our validations are working?
I would say if you make it through the first 4 with no problem, go ahead and add tests with shoulda matchers. If you're in a spot where validations still seem kind of challenging and new, that's okay. Just focus on exploring the validation helpers documentation here, adding those. But I think, hopefully we have enough time for you all to practice testing as well as adding validations and doing browser-driven testing. You need to make sure that the validation is working somehow. So yeah, I would say if you're really overwhelmed with this concept, just start with these first few and just implement them. But if this is all kind of making sense and seems like you would get this done and not be challenged, then maybe even test drive them. That would be my suggestion. Sorry, I know that was a little bit vague and conditional, but does that clear that up?
Yeah, and just for a little bit of clarity, the test would be in the models, right?
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Anything else? Cool. I'm going to stop sharing and go create those breakout rooms for you. Okay, we might have one group of 3, but those are opening now, and we'll come back together in about 25 minutes.
Oh, Jameson, sorry. Can I ask you a quick question before I go to my room?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, let me show you. So I was doing this on the last thing because I misinterpreted what we were supposed to do, and I'm getting an error, and I cannot figure out what it's talking about. But when I try and create a song with a title, it gives me an undefined method name error, and the word name is nowhere to be found.
No method error, undefined method name for song. That's interesting. Can you, can you open up your schema, I suppose, just to eliminate anything weird going on there? Okay, let's go back to your song model.
I feel like I should maybe go to my room real quick and tell whoever is there that I'll be there in a minute. Should I?
Let's see.
I'm an 8.
8. Yeah, looks like you're with Alex. How about you go ahead and go over there, and then I will join your breakout room in a second. Yeah.
Sounds good. Thank you.
No problem.
The connection between the bang and the validation. Hello.
I think the bang just means if you get an error, it's going to explain what the error is.
Right, and that makes sense. I was just wondering how it connected to validation, essentially.
Good question.
I feel like I'm missing. Yeah. Also, hello.
Hi, I'm here. Can I help you with your thing, Natia, so y'all can get started?
Sorry.
Yeah.
Thanks.
This is honestly stumping me, but I'm sure it's not anything we can't figure out. So let's, can you, I know that you said you looked through this whole file, but could you Command F inside of your song.rb just to, yeah, name.
So to catch you up, Alex, the issue that I'm getting right now is that like when I validate my title and I create something with a title, I get an undefined method name error.
Well, that's rude.
So it does look like you have name coming up here somewhere in song.rb. I wonder if we could just like comment out that whole method and try again. And you might have to do a reload in your console or exit your console and come back in. Yeah.
Okay, that's good.
It's further than you got last time, right?
Yeah, that's the error I wanted.
Cool. I think that was the only thing that was giving you trouble, but if you have any more issues, feel free to use the ask for help feature. I'll come right back.
I do have one more question actually.
Okay.
So bullets 2, 3, and 4, which says like access validation errors when a validation fails on a model in your console. Like, are you just looking for us to be like, here it is, there's the error?
What I would say is Rails gives us something kind of nice and nifty for looking at errors and what they are. I would maybe do some Googling around Rails validations errors object. I don't want to give it all the magic away, but maybe just do some Googling and some looking around the docs and see if you can find any more detail about like interacting with validation errors.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
No problem. See you in a bit.
See you.
Hi, I'm just floating around to see if people have questions. How is everything going okay in here?
Yeah, we're just, we both kind of prefer working independently, so we're gonna work on our own and then come back together with questions at the end.
Okay, yeah, no problem at all. Just wanted to see how everybody's doing. See y'all in a bit then.
Cool. Thanks, Jameson.
So that is why it's not already working. Hi, Jameson.
Hi. Just thought I'd pop in and see if any questions came up because I know a couple of other groups had some questions. So yeah, how are things going?
I think okay. We're kind of just on the first one here, and we yes, Jermaine, it did pass. We threw a test in there just to see if what we did worked. So yeah, and so far it's good.
Awesome. Cool. If y'all get to the bullet points that talk about accessing validation errors, I will say that's something worth Googling because there is a tool available to you beyond just the output that we were looking at together with that chart. So yeah, just a little, if you run out of things to do, maybe Google around about accessing active record validation errors in your console.
Okay, rad, thanks.
No problem. See y'all in a bit.
Okay.
Hi, I'm just checking in with people. How are things going, and or have any questions come up?
I think I have a uniqueness in my artist,
okay,
but it doesn't seem to be. So if I go test equals artist dot new, I just did this a few seconds ago, sorry. And we do test dot valid.
What happens if you try to
Not
say
valid.
do like test.save?
Yeah, it gives the rollback. So would that be then when I can see the errors?
Yeah, let's try it. There you go.
Okay. So that thing was I wasn't saving it, and so I didn't have errors yet.
Yep.
Okay. Thank
Looks
you.
like you're on a good track. Unless there's anything else, I'm going to hop around to some other rooms.
Uh-oh.
Oh,
you're recording now.
Oh, like what just happened?
Got scared.
Sorry about that. I was just hopping around a few rooms to see how things are going. Are any questions coming up for y'all so far, or just kind of plugging away?
Yeah, we did the first one, uniqueness, and then we did the second one, presence, with playlist, or not playlist, but artists. But we found this, I guess, a dot present when we set the a equals artist dot first. So that was interesting, but I guess there isn't one for unique. So
yeah,
maybe
those helper methods I would consider probably pretty separate from the actual validations that you're adding, but it looks like you're on a path to kind of see like you can't add two artists with the same name, right? That'll fail because of the validations.
Yeah, and then we got out and then tested it without this, and then it has right here, I guess, two prints, same name. I guess we're on the next one, but we don't have a clue.
Let's see which one. I'm just looking at the thing real quick. That would be
It'd be
access
access.
validation errors.
Yeah, how do you check, I guess, or access? How do you access it?
You could definitely Google around for a little bit more information, but I'll give you something to get started, hopefully. Let's set up like a failure. So now you have the validates name, presence true, uniqueness true. Let's try creating, you want to create one artist with one name, and then you want to try to create another artist with the same name. And let's assign both of those things to variables the way that you've been doing.
Oh, but this is with the validates or no?
Yes, with the validation implemented, yeah. Okay, now let's do like B equals and then try to do the exact same thing. But you're going to go ahead and we want this to fail actually. In order to access the errors, we need it to fail. So let's make the name exactly the same.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah. So now let's do B dot errors. And this is a nifty object that Rails gives you. This is like a method you can call on something that has failed for some reason. I suppose you could probably call it on something that has succeeded to persist, but it's really useful when you have a failure, because then you can see exactly what the error is and you can access this hash. So you could say like b.errors.messages hash notation name, right? Like you could put, or sorry, like the bracket to access that part of the hash. Yeah.
Oh, interesting. It's
So-
oh, it's it's like preset or something.
This is an object that's generated for you whenever there are errors on something you've tried to persist. So this isn't the only thing you can do with this. There are like other helper methods around the validation errors object. So I'll let y'all do like Googling and doc searching for other interesting things about this, but that's kind of what that question was getting at.
Okay, so this you already have it. I guess I noticed it in the pet controller or something like that, where yeah, it has that all that. But I guess I was looking for the error message but couldn't find it.
Yeah, it's pretty abstracted away until like we get into these validations and how the errors object works. But yeah, I'll let y'all do more exploring with that. Any other questions before I hop?
That's cool. Not for me.
I'm curious, like, is there a list of these sort of set things? It's all in the Google, I guess.
Yeah, I would, for what it's worth, I think for looking at error messages, validation errors, that kind of thing, I would look specifically in the active record docs. I wouldn't look in like shoulda matchers or any gems or even Google. I think you'll find the best material in the edge guides, the Ruby on Rails edge guides. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Right, no problem. See y'all in a bit.
Thanks, Jameson.
Rails. Hello.
Whoa. Oh, is it because is Jameson here?
I'm here.
Yes.
Just thought
Oh,
I'd pop
hello.
in, see how things are going. Any questions coming up, or yeah, how's it going?
We're doing all right. We have to do a migration to make a uniqueness type deal because it doesn't work on the whole database. It just creates the same name with different other unique attributes.
Gotcha. Yeah.
It
That
doesn't
makes
work on the
sense.
whole row. Sorry. So that's what we're doing now.
Cool. Okay, seems like y'all are doing great, but if any questions come up, I'll be around. See you in a little bit.
Good. See you.
Or not.
Nope.
Hi. So I was having problems. I started testing, and the shoulda for validation. I read through all of that, and maybe I'm just missing something. But the so the validation one works. This one here. Then when I was trying to access the errors to check it that way, but it throws a validation error that it errors out before I hit that. So do I have to do something like I did with artist? And is there a place to find these matchers?
Yep, I would reference the shoulda matcher docs for specific specific things you want to match to. They should get pretty specific. Yeah, I think accessing errors in the tests, I don't know that that's conventional. I would expect, you know, a shoulda matchers. So this is the other piece of that. Can you scroll all the way back up to the top?
Yep.
Can you click on just shoulda matchers? Yeah, like further back. Yep. Further back, like the actual shoulda matchers keyword.
Sorry.
Yeah. No problem. And then if you scroll down, I think it would be here. I think you'll find different types of I think that was probably documentation for one specific piece. You'll find other matchers in here somewhere, I would imagine.
That was the link where the link in the in here took me.
Gotcha.
Was right to that specific one. So I thought for some reason that was the only one we were supposed to use.
Yeah, we should probably update that, but yeah, you've got it now. Like if you look in the README, I think you'll find something more helpful. Sorry about that. I'm gonna go get these breakout rooms closed, so I'll see you in a second. All right, hi everybody. I hope you all got a chance to take a palm. We have just a few minutes left here. And I wanted to get through a couple of last slides before we break today, and I'll try to get through them fairly quickly so that if there are questions to go through, we have time for those. Yes, here we are. So there is one type of validation that I wanted to call out as being a little bit of a gotcha. The presence helper is what we use in most cases to validate that something exists, that we're not trying to create a record without the presence of a certain column. The problem with this and Boolean validations is that this will actually use the blank method underneath the hood to check to see if there is a blank string or if there is a nil value in that column. And the issue, there's an issue with that. So I'll leave this slide up for just a minute or two so that you can think about this. If we have a variable called some variable set to the value of false, and we see that that's returning false, and then we call some variable dot blank, what will we get? Does anybody have an idea of what this line here, the second line in the code example, what would that return? Some variable dot blank. Lawrence? You're muted.
Is it going to return true that it's blank because false returns a falsified statement?
Yeah, exactly. So this blank method is only going to return true if it finds an empty string or nil. And in this case, we have the value of false, which should pass the validation because we have a value there. It's a little bit of a mess. So there's a special syntax for Boolean validations. You can use this validates Boolean field name inclusion, and then you can pass it what you would like to include, which for Booleans, it's going to be either true or false. Alternatively, you can exclude nil. Either of these will work. I don't see a reason that you couldn't have both. But here's another example of why this is necessary. If we are creating an artist and we have their Boolean column set to false, currently Turing is false. If we ask, this should be a lowercase a, sorry, autocorrect. But if we ask if artist.currentlyturing.blank, it will return true. It will say that it's blank, meaning that the validation, the ordinary presence true validation isn't going to work. I don't want to spend too much time here, but I wanted to point it out in case anybody was getting stuck on this part of the exercise or on validating a Boolean field in the project. I think we can skip the CFUs for now in favor of any questions that came up during that exercise. So yeah, what questions came up? Noah.
We got around to trying to create a validation that only runs on a certain circumstance, and we didn't get it to do what we wanted. And I think we're maybe missing like another reference for it somewhere or something like that. We tried to do it on update and couldn't get it.
Gotcha. So just to clarify, this one that you were working on was the second to last bullet point. It's add a new column to the playlist table that has a validation that only runs on update, right? Cool. Did anybody else have a solution for that one out of curiosity? No, okay. Noah, do you mind sharing your screen and maybe we can figure it out together?
I was actually the one who ran it. I can share my
Okay,
screen
or
now.
whoever, yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
No, you're good.
So real quick, here's the validation that we found in the docs.
Mm-hmm.
And then when we tried to name it true, it like came back as a string of T.
Okay. So, sorry, just trying to orient myself on what's going on here. So you tried to update it so that it would validate the uniqueness, and you did not see, you basically didn't see the change reflected when you ran the update in your console? Or yeah, I guess if you could walk me through what you did in your console just to make sure, because I see it returned to collection. Yeah, I'm not sure where we're at in this process as far as calling the update.
Yeah, sorry, I've never worked with these before, so I'm not like familiar. Zach, do you looks like maybe you know
exactly what's going on. So you're setting the name to be true, but Postgres changes true values to either T or F. And so it's changing it to a T when it gets to the database to hold on to it, but you don't have a way to change that T back to a true value once you bring it back to your Rails app.
Gotcha. Thanks, I appreciate it.
Yep, that makes sense. Thank you, Zach. Yeah, I think the way that you have your validation written out in the model is correct. If you come in, if you notice any other like weird behavior, I'd love to check it out in code help. But for the sake of trying to get to people's questions, Zach, was your hand up from before, or did you have something else to add or another question? Okay, cool. Regina.
When testing for validation in a spec file, I've tried like over the weekend, I was doing something like expect current path to like pretty much be the same thing, but after you like push a submit button, but it was moving on anyway. And what I was looking at just now was expect, let's say your instance dot to be valid or to not be valid. Is that the correct way of testing for your validation, or should, yeah, does that question make sense?
I think so. So what I would say to that is with validations, we would be testing with shoulda matchers, which is the one of the documentation pieces that was listed in the slides. But I noticed that it was linking to a very specific part of the docs and not necessarily what I was showing in class earlier, which is like the homepage of the repo. Regina, have you tried testing validations with shoulda matchers? You're muted.
Oh, no, I was actually looking at that validations page, the one that was in there. I'll look at the shoulda matchers one a little bit more in depth.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a good question. I think you may run into, like out in the real world after Turing, other ways of testing validations, but I can pretty confidently say the rest of Turing, we're asking that you test them using shoulda matchers. It's pretty standard in the Rails community.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. And that also brings up, like I mentioned, I think the docs linked in the lesson plan were slightly different. So I do want to point something out right before I get to your question, Mark. 1 second here. So here we have the lesson plan, and it says to use shoulda matchers and validation helpers to accomplish the following. I think these were linked differently in the slides. So for anybody who is following the lesson plan, if you click on this, it's going to take you to that GitHub repo, but it actually dropped us on the validate uniqueness of matcher specifically. And this is helpful because we can look at the source code, and it has some examples. So this is a good example of the on validation that we were looking at when Joe screen shared, but it's not super helpful for everything else. So to find the root of the documentation, you would need to go back to the main page of the GitHub repo. And then there's a table of contents here. Just wanted to point that out in case that was tripping anybody up. Okay, Mark, let's go to your question.
For the numericality one, I tested out, it seems like it recognizes numbers within the quotes, but I guess maybe text it doesn't recognize.
Interesting.
Let me check for that.
Could you, do you have an example handy? Could you share your screen?
Yeah, sure. I was testing this one right here, but I think when I put it in quotes like here, it seemed to have worked. So I just wanted to double check if that's.
Yeah, that's a good question. And what I'll point out here, it seems like maybe this is another thing where Postgres, Zach pointed out that if you update something with the word true or the word false and it's a string column, it will convert it to something else like T or F. I think here, likely Rails and Postgres, I'm not sure which handles this exactly, but likely what it would do is say, hey, I see that there are only number characters in this string. I'm just going to convert it and save it as an integer in the database. Because if you look at the returned song object down here where I added my second underline, it says play count 20 and 20 is not in a string. So my best guess is that it's done the converting for you, which is kind of nice.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Yeah, I think your validation looks great. Any other questions about class today? Okay, in that case, that's all I have. If you didn't make it through all of the practice exercises, I would recommend spending some time on that just to get familiar with what's available to you, and especially working on the testing. But other than that, thank you all for your time and plan to see you tomorrow. One more thing, I just remembered, if you have not yet signed up for a project check-in sometime, I believe there are some times left for this afternoon, but there are a lot more times tomorrow. Make sure that you do that with the link that is on the project check-in calendar event and sign up for a 15-minute check-in, please. Okay, that's it. Thank you, everybody.